प्रोग्राम आज पाकिस्तान में मैं हूं आपका मेज़बान सईद काजी। नाज़रीन, दुनिया बहुत बड़ी तब्दीलियों की ज़द में है। एक बहुत बड़ा माशी तूफान या जिसे अब एक इकोनॉमिक सुनामी भी कहा जा रहा है, वो पूरी दुनिया को घेरे में लिए हुए, और यूं लगता है कि कोई भी रिजीम, कोई भी स्टेबल रिजीम नहीं रही। यहाँ पे हमने देखा कि अमेरिका में बड़े फैनफेयर के साथ आया था ओबामा, मगर आज ओबामा जो है वो तेज़ी से वो उसकी मकबूलियत ख़त्म हो रही है। और फिर यूनान में हम देख रहे हैं मुजाहरे, आज पाकिस्तान में मुजाहरे हुए। तो आज हमारे स्पेशल एडिशन में हम गुफ्तगू करेंगे वर्ल्ड इकानमी के ज़िमन में भी, और उसमें इसी हवाले से पाकिस्तान की बात करेंगे। और हमारे साथ स्टूडियो में है मारूफ दानिश्वर और लिखारी एलन वुड्स, जो कि इससे पहले भी चैनल 5 पे हमसे बात कर चुके हैं। ये गुफ्तगू ज़ाहिर इंग्लिश में होगी, मगर इसकी उर्दू जो है ट्रांसलेशन आप स्क्रीन पर देख सकेंगे। थैंक यू वेरी मच एलन, एंड यू नो thank you for sparing time for us. Well, it's a long time. I last when interviewed you a year ago,
12 months ago.
And a lot of things have changed meanwhile.
Indeed.
And we will refer to what you said during that discussion. But my first question to you is that this is a very strange world that is emerging out of this economic tsunami, as they put it.
Yes.
So what do you think? What kind of world would emerge out of this? Do you think that the older political and economic structures are being threatened? And now we see the movement in Greece, there is a movement, and now the next they say in the row is Spain. So what type of world is emerging out of this chaos and mess?
Well, I think, if I remember correctly, last time we spoke, I said that the world was entering into uncharted waters. And I think that everything we've seen in the last 12 months shows that that's precisely the position. Now, there was quite an interesting article, an editorial, I don't know if you saw that in The Economist, at the beginning of this year, which made the following observation. It said that 2009 will be remembered as the year of bank defaults, and 2010 will be remembered historically as the year in which nations defaulted. Now, this is an extremely interesting observation, and a very serious comment concerning the dilemma which they now face on a world scale. Not just in Greece, but on a world scale, in Pakistan also, by the way.
Well, that has happened now, and we have seen that. Do you think there is any remedy to all this while staying in the existing system? How would they tackle this sovereign default now? Because we know Greece is defaulting, and then the next is Spain in the row. How would they tackle it?
Well, you see, if I borrow some money of yourself or of a bank or whatever, or you borrow some money, I understand that I must pay the money back. What is not clear to me is here you have the banks which have been given billions of dollars and pounds from sovereign governments, and it's not the banks that are requested to pay this money back, but the ordinary citizens who are not responsible for this mess and yet are being presented with the bill. And what a bill it is. Now, we've just just passed through, and it's not finished yet. It is not finished yet, despite what the economists and the politicians try to say. The crisis is not over. But this crisis was undoubtedly, I mean, they admit this themselves, this was the deepest, the most serious economic crisis for the last 60 years. That much they admit to. But I would beg to suggest that in many respects, this is the deepest and most serious crisis in 200 years in the whole history of capitalism. I mean, they were faced with a complete collapse. We discussed this in my last interview,
yes,
12 months ago. Now, it seems, on the face of it, it appears that they've escaped the worst calamity, that they've prevented a collapse on the lines, for example, of 1929, the Wall Street collapse. Yes, but how have they done this? They've done it by pouring in the most astonishing, astronomical quantities of money into the capitalist system, into the banks specifically. Obama in the United States paid out approximately 800 billion American dollars to the banks and also to big companies like Ford's. In Britain, which is a far smaller country, Gordon Brown has paid out 400 billion pounds, which, proportion to the size of our population, is a far greater amount. Now, If you were to establish an historical parallel to this, people mentioned the Marshall Aid Plan that followed the
$66 billion?
The colossal, it was a bit more than that.
Okay.
But after the colossal devastation of the Second World War, in a 2-year period, 1945 to 1947, it was approximately, in modern money, that's probably the difference with your figure, in modern money it would be the equivalent of $200 billion. Okay. So the amounts which they poured into the capitalist system, into the banks and big business, are without precedent in the whole of history. By comparison, the Marshall Aid was small beer, small stuff. Now the question is of course, A, where do they get this money from? And B, who is going to pay the final bill? That's the big question which is now facing us.
So who will? People at large?
Well, it certainly will not be the bankers, who after all are responsible for this mess, at least in the financial sector they're responsible.
But Aaron, do you think that through pouring in that much money they could retrieve the situation and they could bring this system back as it used to be?
Well, temporarily, of course, if you pour that amount of money into the system, it must have some effect. It has had some effect in the sense it's prevented a wholesale collapse of the world financial system. There also seems to be some kind of a growth. They refer to the green shoots. Personally, I don't see much evidence of that. There's some growth in the United States, hardly any growth in Europe, and really speaking, it's only Asia, specifically China, where there's also been a huge amount of money has been injected, where the economy is going forward. The general world economy is still very much in crisis.
Well, as you said that somebody has to pay, and as you said, certainly there won't be bankers to pay for that. Now we have seen what's happening in Greece because people have to pay, and they are being told that they will have to pay, and they are out on the streets, and yes. It was shut, and the Greece was shut twice, I think, in the last week. Yes. Do you think it would spur movements in Europe even?
Well, certainly. I don't think that one has to be an economic genius or a politically conscious animal to understand the following, that it doesn't make much sense to the ordinary man and woman, whether it's in Britain or in the United States or indeed in Pakistan, that huge amounts are put into the pockets of the rich, into the pockets of the bankers, into the pockets of the capitalists, and at the end of the state turns around and says, well, I'm very sorry, there's no money for houses, there's no money, what do you say in Pakistan? Roti, kapra or makan, no question of that. There are no hospitals to be built, there is no money for health, there is no money for education, you know, and you have to foot the bill. In other words, all the governments are saying to the masses, to the poor people, to the workers, to the peasants, to the students, you must pay for the crisis of the capitalist system. Now, I don't think that makes much sense. I don't think there's any justice in that. Not that this world is based upon justice in any event, but certainly people are going to have something to say about this. In the case of Greece, for example, you already mentioned, there's already been 3 or 4 general strikes.
Yeah, in a matter of a few days.
In a matter of a few days. Mass demonstrations. People are on the streets saying to the government in Greece, now look, we are not prepared to pay for this crisis. And of course I believe that will be a general response, not just in Greece. There's been similar strikes in Italy, in Portugal, where they have a similar problem. In Spain, I believe there's a general strike on the cards. And therefore I would say that the attempt to push the bill, this huge bill, on the shoulders of the poorest layers of society, if you think that people will just accept this quietly, you've got another thing coming.
Aaron, the other day, maybe yesterday, Angela Merkel said that the countries like Greece must be excluded from the European Union. What is the future of the European Union in the wake of this crisis?
Yes, well, what she actually said was to be excluded from the Eurozone. It's not quite the same, but it's a similar question. Well, if you remember, over 10 years ago, I predicted that this was going to happen.
Yeah, but at the time when they were getting together.
Yes, when they were all boasting and bragging about the European unification, the irresistible, supposedly irresistible process in the direction of European unity. We pointed out at the time, I wrote a document called The Socialist Alternative to the European Union, in which we predicted that on a capitalist basis, capitalism is based upon anarchy, the anarchy of the so-called free market. Although, incidentally, what's free about the free market economy when they now depend entirely upon the money of the state? Where is the risk? The argument was that the capitalists deserve all these billions because they take the risk. Where's the risk? When the banks collapse and the state immediately is presented with the bill.
They nationalize the losses.
That's right. Nationalize the losses and privatize the profits. That's always the way with these gentlemen. But to go back to your point, we said that on the basis of capitalism, it is not possible to unify Europe. The contradictions between the national economies emerge. And we specifically said, I specifically wrote, over 10 years ago, it is impossible to unify economies which are pulling in different directions. We also predicted that this contradiction would emerge at the time of a recession, which is precisely what you've got at the present time. You see, obviously, where there's a boom, it's a bit like the American gangsters here in the gangster movies, in the Hollywood movies, you know. If there's plenty of loot, the gangsters can come to an amicable arrangement. But when there's not much loot available, they will fight for the possession of whatever there is. That's the position now. If I may, there's an interesting quote again from The Economist, which is hardly a left-wing journal, of the 6th of February of this year, which says the following: "The Greek crisis only confirms the folly of binding a group of disparate countries together in a currency zone with no mechanisms such as a central fiscal authority to regulate its internal imbalances." Now, this is precisely what we wrote more than 10 years ago, so they've learnt the lesson a little bit late. Now, Greece, of course, is the weak link, one of the weak links, because there are others. Italy is not in much better position than Greece, if you look at the figures. Portugal is certainly no better than Greece. Ireland is in desperate trouble, and Spain also is in difficulties. As a matter of fact, one of the problems they face with the Greek crisis is if they don't save Greece, and Greece goes into a default, then there can be a knock-on, a dominoes effect. The next, of course, the speculators, they're like hungry wolves, speculating against currencies, speculating against national economies and so on. They can drag whole national economies down, which is what they're doing to Greece at the present time.
Do you think that even the richer countries and the stronger countries like Germany or France would also be in same kind of state?
Well, not immediately Germany and France, but certainly, I've already said, Spain would be on the list, Portugal would be next, Italy would be next, and even Britain. You see, even Britain with the colossal debts, they are seriously discussing the possibility. The pound is already under attack by the same speculators. They sense that there is a weakness, and therefore they sell